So, Finlay, great to see you. You did two things that I want to congratulate you for. First of all, it's doing the Donegal Ultra 555, which we're going to talk about, but also you fundraise for MS Ireland and you've already raised an incredible around 20,000, if I'm correct.
That's it. Yeah, nearly 21 now. So really pleased with how the fundraising's been going, and it's just been incredible how people have come together to get behind this.
And it's still open, isn't it? If people see this now and they wanted to fundraise, we'll put up a link to it on the video. People can still fundraise, can't they?
Yeah, that's it. So it'll be open for about another month. Um, Now that I've actually completed it, hopefully people are convinced that it's a worthy cause to donate to. Because I'm aware that before the race there was a bit of skepticism as to whether or not I'd be able to complete it. But really happy that it's worked out.
And why did you choose MS Ireland for your fundraising?
I have a personal connection to MS, and so that's sort of the go-to charity for me if I do want to associate a sporting event with fundraising.
And so the Donegal Ultra 555, it kind of says what it is on the tin. What is the 555 part?
Yeah, that's it. So it's 555 kilometers around Donegal, the Wild Atlantic Way, and there's about 6,700 meters of elevation on the route. And generally speaking, these sorts of events are hosted in many locations around the world, and many people partake. But I think what makes the Donegal 555 so special is just the brutal climate that you encounter along the way. Like the wind and the rain are soul destroying, and that's something I guess we can get into more when we talk about sort of the unsupported aspect of this ride.
And I suppose, so for people that are doing it, the traditional route is you do the cycle. Everyone's kind of doing it on their own, but there's most people are doing it, do it, support it, which means what does that mean? Support it. You did it unsupported, but the traditional way is
Yeah,
support it. What's support it?
so generally, like you can complete it is a race, and you can complete it in teams of say six or four or three, two. And if you're going to do the solo category, the standard option is to have two drivers in a car behind you that will carry your food and water and layers for the night ride, help for mechanicals and all this kind of stuff. Um, and above all, I think one of the most important aspects of that support car is the emotional support that they can provide, sort of talking you through any um, downs that you might have, slumps in the ride. And that can be very difficult for riders. So doing it unsupported basically just means that anything you might need on the ride, you have to carry yourself on the bike. Um, you're not allowed to accept any sort of aid, food, or water from people outside of the race along the course of the ride, unless you're going into a shop and buying it yourself. Um, and it changes the dynamics a little bit. It means that you're a lot slower. That's one thing for sure. Some of the unsupported guys and some of the supported guys and supported teams absolutely blasted through the race, putting out incredible power and showing fantastic athletic prowess. But for me, that's not what I was looking for in this ride. I wanted to find something that was challenging mentally alongside physically, and I'm quite certain that I did.
And even so, something that shows how difficult it is, as you mentioned about there's two people in the support car. And the reason for that is because one person couldn't do it. Like you need two because one is resting because it's the race goes through the night. So that says
Yeah,
something, doesn't it?
that's it. I mean, you need two drivers because it's safer that way. The riders tend not to sleep on the course, and so the drivers, unless you're going to interchange, um, they'll need to sleep as well sometimes, just to make sure that everybody's within health and safety regulations.
And so you started it, am I right in saying you started it, was it the 11th of August? And it was at like around 5 a.m.
Yeah,
When you
yeah, sounds
started,
right.
and you go straight through. That was on a Friday until the following around 2 o'clock the next day, wasn't it? How many hours is
Yeah,
that? What?
exactly. So that was about 32 or 33. It was like between 32 and 33 hours in total. And within that there are periods of relative rest. So say for example, I'm stopped at a shop and I'm filling up my water, and I'm getting food, or I'm sat down waiting for a coffee. Um, so the 33 hours was the time that it took me to finish the race, but not thankfully not all of that was pedaling.
Well, mentally, it must be very hard then to, I'd say, when you get off the bike to do that, fill up to get back on again, knowing what's ahead of you.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you kind of you really have to compartmentalize in a race like this. For anybody doing it, even if you're doing team category, um, the the difficulty of these events is relative. So, if a 50 or 60K ride is hard for you and you're finding your limit that way, it'll be just as hard for you as somebody whose limit is maybe a larger distance. But that's the whole point, is really to find ways to get through hard situations.
How
And
do you do that? Are you thinking, so you obviously aren't going, I've got another 30 hours to go, which is what I'd be
exactly,
doing.
so that's it. You kind of can't think that way. And for me, personally, like the first 120 kilometers kind of flew by, and I was really excited by the race and um, the event itself. Like I kind of got carried away, and so I went a bit too fast for the first maybe 6 hours. And it meant that on the way back into Letterkenny, I had a big headwind. I was starting to really get tired. And so for about 4.5 hours, I was just sort of on empty, and had to find ways to refuel on the bike and compartmentalize mentally, just telling myself, I'm gonna I'm just gonna get to this checkpoint, or I'm just gonna get to this food stop. And at that point, I'll re-energize, reassess, see how I feel. And you just kind of do that on rinse and repeat, no matter how you feel. So about 200K into the ride, I was at a gas station and really worried with um, what my performance had been so far, and sort of telling myself, okay, whatever I've done for the last uh, say 8 hours is not going to work in the future. I have to come up with a new plan. And that was a real low point for me, because it wasn't the furthest that I had ever gone. And one of the goals of this race, one of the personal goals, just alongside raising money for charity, was to do something new, to experience something new. And so I just said, right, I'll break the ride down into sort of 50 or 60K rides, and I'll stop at those points until I hit 320 kilometers, 330 kilometers, which is as far as I've ever gone before in my life. And at that stage, there's a medical check and a center where the race organizers offer a bit of shelter and some food before the night ride, even to the unsupported riders. So the main goal during the day was to get to that point and then see how I felt.
Saw a video of you going up like a mountain type road in the pitch dark with just some lights. I presume, was that around that time? The
Yeah, so
lights.
that was just before the medical check, exactly. That was one last climb, and yeah, all the lights were on at that stage.
I mean, that's what you're going towards, but that must be so hard when it like going through the night as well
Yeah,
on your
so
own.
exactly that it's one of those things that I'm sure I had quite a different experience to some of the other riders, especially those unsupported, because as far as I could make out, everybody knew what they were doing. Whereas this was my first ultra event, and it was for that reason that I was quite excited about the night ride. I'd never ridden overnight, over a full night before, and I'd ridden in the dark, but for brief periods of time, sort of early in the morning. Um, and so it was one of the things I was really looking forward to in the ride. And once I reached that threshold where I was going into the night ride, um, that was there was something quite eerie and special about that for say the first 2 hours, because for the first time in the race, it's not something that you've experienced before,
Mm.
and you're sort of past that point. You're into the unknown, and there is something really special about that. I think for every athlete, whether you've done your first 10K or your first 100K, the feeling of walking into the unknown is really one that's quite special. But that only lasted about 2 hours, unfortunately, before I was starting to get pretty cold and wet, and had some more immediate problems on my hand to deal with, as opposed to appreciating the solidarity of the night ride.
I saw a quote on your fundraising page, and it was a quote from Lachlan Morton. It talked about hitting rock bottom, and then saying, and that's looking forward to it, that it was weirdly exciting. So,
Yeah,
and
and
did you hit rock bottom? Was there a time when you went, oh gosh, I don't know
yeah,
if I can keep going?
it follows that idea. I think I did hit rock bottom, like physically and mentally, but fortunately for me, I wasn't really asking myself whether or not I could keep going. Um, I think the weight of having raised money for charity, just mentally, I'd already distinguished that I didn't have the option to stop. That whatever happens, I was going to finish. And I was telling my younger brother, who's interested in physics, is um, there's a point for black holes. If you cross what's called the event horizon, every line of your future points towards the singularity of the black hole. And in my head, I kept telling myself, I've crossed the event horizon. So whether I'm resting or pedaling, either way, my the lines of my future are going towards the finish of this race. And it may sound crazy now to talk about these things, but at that moment in time, it's those thoughts that are really important, to keep you going and to keep you moving. And just the idea that, like, even if I was going slowly, at least I was getting closer. Um, so I didn't really feel that I wouldn't finish it, but I definitely hit rock bottom in the sense that it was the worst I have ever felt physically and mentally. At the same time, too, um, at probably 6 a.m. On Saturday morning, kind of just after the night ride, maybe half an hour after the sun has started to rise. It really does wake you up when the sun rises and you start to feel a bit better. Uh, but then once you cop on that you've got another maybe 7 hours ahead of you, um, it's hard to get through that.
Then I'm assuming that when you do get to that finish line, the sense of exhilaration must be amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. I mean, once you get to that point, it's quite confusing because you've been alone the whole time and you've really put yourself into a box so that you can just think about very specific, relatively positive things that will keep you going. So to finish, um, it's bizarre to have to interact with people again so suddenly, having not slept, and you're just wired with all sorts of gels and caffeine that you've been ingesting over the course of the race. So it's really exciting, but a bit of a shock to the system.
So, and are your legs like jelly when you finish?
Yeah, they're numb. Like,
Numb.
I I think about 7 hours before I finished the race, I stood up on a climb and strained a muscle in my left quad, which because I just had no energy, I was on empty, and so my left quad sort of gave out, and that just meant that for the next sort of 7 hours, I couldn't stand up on the bike, and I had to compromise my pedal stroke, which was severely uncomfortable. Um, but yeah, you're really at the point where your body is falling apart, is how it felt. At any moment, a muscle or a muscle set could give out, and one of the hardest parts is actually navigating that battle so that you can stay on the bike, and just tethering on the threshold, I would call it.
Interesting, because the way you're talking, it to me it sounds like it's more of a mental battle than a physical battle.
Yeah, in this case, I'd say it was. Uh, I think a lot of people, so maybe not a lot, but more people than you'd expect can put their body through something like this, if only you could switch off. But a lot of practice, a lot of the training that you do leading up to these types of events is um, is important because it mentally prepares you above all else to deal with pain, to deal with adversity, to deal with challenges along the way. And you mentioned Lachlan Morton earlier. I have a habit of watching a lot of his videos, and something he talks about for night rides is these brief periods where you encounter sort of hallucinations, if you will, or you can't really, your eyes start to play tricks on you. And it really did happen to me a couple of times on the ride where I'd look up and see a man on the side of the road, um, wave to him, carry on pedaling, and sort of a couple meters away realize that it was a bush and not a man. But in the dark, when you can only see your front wheel and you're very tired, these sorts of things do become real, and there's nothing else around you to remind you that it's not until you're a bit closer. So there's a lot of the fact that I had heard Lachlan talk about that sort of thing before meant that when it was happening, I was conscious of it, and I wasn't too surprised. It didn't make me think, oh, maybe I should stop. I knew that it was the type of thing that you could keep going.
And you're the kind of person that you've done other challenges. Like I think for MS Ireland, you did Mont Blanc to the top of Mont. We went to Mont Blanc. So you're
Yeah.
that like. Have you done loads of challenges in your life? Are you always looking out? Like what I'm interested in is one is that one Mont Blanc, and the other one is like what's your next one? Have you thought about it yet?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. In 2017, I climbed Mont Blanc for MS Ireland, and that was a sort of a goal of mine that I'd had for a long time because I grew up partly in a town called Chamonix in the French Alps, and that sits under the gaze of Mont Blanc. So you always have this massive figure and name and challenge there, sort of enticing you to try it. So eventually, I did try, and I was happy to have been able to do it that year. It's largely dependent on the conditions, um, and then I suppose I don't always look out for these challenges, but they're the sort of thing that maybe disappear as time goes on. Like I got into cycling three or 4 years ago now, and it was only last year when I had done that 220K ride with a friend that I realized at the end that I could keep going. And it was that thought that stuck with me, that made me question sort of, I wonder what the limit is, and I wonder how difficult it would be to find. And it was at that point that I started looking at ultra events around Ireland and eventually found the Donegal 555. In terms of what comes next, um, I'm unsure. There are certain sort of life goals boxes I want to tick. Like I have a marathon coming up now in October. I've never run a marathon before, so I wanted to do that. Eventually, I'd love to do an Ironman to tick that box, and then for cycling, there's what's called the transcontinental race. It's 16 days from Belgium to Turkey, fully self-supported. So you kind of do like between 2 and 300K a day, for 16 days. And I've seen some people on YouTube do that. It looks like a phenomenal way to see a large part of Europe. Uh, but these are all things that I haven't signed up for. And if I don't do them, well, apart from the marathon that's coming up, they're in the back of my mind, but I'm not prioritizing them as of right now.
You know, what you did for MS Ireland, like raising over 20,000 now, was just amazing achievement. So, one, thank you so much. But also, we get lots of people that want to do individual like activities like that, like marathons or races and things like that. Like, how did you go about it? How did you go about doing that fundraising? Because it was phenomenal.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the most exciting parts was that you could really expand your network in doing this. And regardless of how, when I set the 20,000 goal, I didn't think that I'd actually reach it. I honestly just thought that if the number was higher, people would be incentivized to donate more. So,
Pro
I'd end
tip.
up with more at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that helped massively was actually, as much as I could, I put together the list of donors. I got all their numbers and I put them in a WhatsApp group. And along the way, whenever I could, and my parents were sort of sporadically located across the race at the top of climbs and stuff to take videos. They would put little updates into the chat as well. And I think it's really important, if you're donating to a charity, to feel like you're involved thereafter, because it's so easy to donate and then never really hear about what actually happened. So
True.
when I left on the morning of the 11th, we'd raised just over 15,000. And in the one day that it took, or 1.5 days that it took me to finish the race, it nearly hit 21,000. So just the fact that I was doing it and people could follow, there was a live tracking website where you could see my little dot on the course. The fact that people could interact with the event, I think, really incentivized more giving. And that's something like, even if it's not the same thing through a WhatsApp group, that idea of involving people in the event is a big lesson that I had learned from this, to raise more funds.
And it was interesting something you said earlier on when you were on the cycle, which I think is an interesting point, is you were thinking of the fact that you were fundraising in a way it helped you to keep going. And that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it's funny because like the night before it meant that I got absolutely no sleep because I felt like there was a lot of pressure on the race. And uh, so the night before it was really annoying, but throughout the race it was actually great because that pressure meant that, for me anyway, like there was no option to not finish. And the event itself has a cutoff time of 40 hours. But along the way, I really did realize, like, even if I don't finish the race within the threshold time, it doesn't matter because the point of this is that I'm doing it, you know,
Right.
however long it takes me, we'll find out, but I'm doing it and I'll do it to raise funds for a good cause. So that thought really, really helped me and just allowed me to go as slow as I needed to, in places where I did need to, and not get carried away with periodic uh, fluxes of energy
No, you're
and
right though.
excitement.
Like the idea that it's not just for yourself, that when you're doing it for a cause, it drives you on, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because if you're doing it for yourself, then you can live with letting yourself down, or if you do, then you can just come back to it another time and prove to yourself that you can do it. Maybe you didn't have the right preparation. But if you're doing it not only for yourself, but for a bigger thing, and for many, many more people who have invested in you and the cause, um, then unless you can't, like for me, unless I couldn't pedal anymore, unless I sort of had a bad accident or got terribly injured, um, I was going to finish it.
To do something like that, you must really learn about yourself, I'd say, do you?
Yeah, I think the learning aspect comes in the following weeks. So now it's been um, a week and sort of 2 days since I finished the race, and um, over this time, there's been sort of long periods of reflection where you look back at the chat that was going on and you look at the photos and the videos. Um, but even now, today, when I'm thinking about it and when I discuss it with people, you do realize um, you do realize new lessons that you can derive from the experience, because it was so big, and because there was a lot of ups and downs to break down. I think it does take a little bit of time for it to fully settle in, and to get the most out of it.
Well, thank you so much. One, for the fundraising, and two, for just being so inspirational for doing that. It was amazing. Well done.
Thank you very much.